Welcome to Brave. Be inspired by the best leaders of Southeast Asia tech. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. I'm Jeremy Au, a VC, founder, and father. Join us for transcripts, analysis, and community at www.jeremyau.com.
Nat is an investment associate at Monks Hill Ventures, a venture capital firm investing in early-stage tech companies, primarily Series A, in Southeast Asia. She is based in Thailand and is responsible for deal sourcing and execution, investment analysis, and portfolio management. With a strong passion for financial inclusion, Nat brings in a decade of experience in fintech, capital markets, and macroeconomics from Thailand. Prior to joining Monks Hill Ventures, she spearheaded fintech and blockchain investments at Beacon Venture Capital, a corporate venture arm of Thailand's top 3 largest banks. Prior to that, Nat advised corporate and SME clients on financial management and hedging strategies at Kbank. She was also an economist at the Bank of Thailand, where she contributed to the setup of Southeast Asia's $240 billion reserve fund. Nat graduated with an MBA from Kellogg School of Management, Northwestern University.
Hey, Nat. Good to see you again.
Hi, Jeremy. Good to see you.
Well, for everybody out there, I'm really excited to share Nat's journey. She's someone that I work with and actually had heard of before I joined Monks Hill Ventures. And so I'm excited to go deeper and share your personal journey with all the folks out there.
Yeah, lovely to be here. And, if there's any questions on the floor or how I can be helpful in sharing my story and answer your questions, would love to do that.
So Nat, for those who don't know you yet, walk us through. So, you grew up in Thailand and then what happened? So, university, walk us through from the beginning across your professional career.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Thailand, never really studied abroad. There was only one time when I studied abroad, which was when I was 16. I spent a year in South Africa, but that was about it. So I graduated undergrad and then started my career at the Central Bank of Thailand. And during that time, I got really interested in the financial inclusion space because it was one of the projects that I worked there. And after working on the policy level work, doing mostly economics and research work, I kind of figured the policy making work was not for me. It was super high level and the impact of your work was multi-year. So I knew that I wanted to do something around financial inclusion and also be closer to people. So I decided to move to a commercial bank in Thailand, one of the top 3 largest banks here called Kasikornbank, and join their capital market business. So I got to use my economics training to forecast interest rate and FX rate in order to provide recommendations to small and big companies on how they can hedge their financial exposure. So I really loved the job. It was super dynamic. Every day was so different. But after a few years, it started to feel repetitive. So I kind of give a thought on what I wanted to do next. And I wasn't sure on which career path I wanted to go. So I decided to do what most people do, which is go to an MBA school to kind of figure yourself out. And so I decided to go to Kellogg and spend 2 years there. And during that time, I got exposed to fintech area and started interning at a few venture capital funds, including one in Thailand and a few in Silicon Valley. For example, Pantera Capital, which is one of the top 3 most active blockchain funds in the world, and 500 startup fintech fund. So that kind of highlighted to me personally that I really liked the job. And so after I graduated, I came back to Thailand and pursued my career in venture capital, started at Beacon Venture, which is a corporate arm of Kbank. And now I have recently moved to Monks Hill, which is a regional venture fund investing in early stage companies across Southeast Asia. And that's how I met Jeremy, our lovely host today.
Yeah, us in the VC world. In fact, I think I really first heard about you coming in from Paul Veritikit, who is another Thai person in San Francisco doing blockchain, and he was a podcast guest of mine. And we was just catching up, and then it turned out we were like, oh, like he was like, Nat is coming, and she's really smart and really good. And I was like, oh, that's great. I would love to meet Nat real soon. And so I was like, And I was like, it's funny, right? Because I was like, such a small world, right? Because I knew him because he was at UC Berkeley with me.
I didn't know you guys go way back.
Just alumni, not buddies that played beer pong together or anything.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to talk about this. So I think let's talk about you grew up in Thailand. Was there a moment in time when you were in Thailand where you were like, oh, I would like to explore and go overseas? Is that what happened, or how did you say something like, I would like to explore the States?
I always wanted to study abroad, and the only way I could do that during high school was to find myself a scholarship to go for an exchange program in South Africa. And during university, I was applying to a few schools and trying to get a scholarship to go study abroad. But then the process wasn't really systematic and I didn't know what I was doing. So I ended up going to a university in Thailand. So it was always been on the back of my mind until I graduated uni. I kind of started a career at the central bank, and everyone who worked there for like 1 or 2 years, they eventually go and study abroad in the UK and pursue their masters. And that was the time when I thought to myself, what was the right plan for me? Because I knew that I didn't really like economics, and I knew that I wanted to continue doing a business program. So it was like, oh, if you want to continue being an employee or work in a corporate or get a professional career, I really do need to get a master's degree because that's all Asians do, right? And so I figured the right way for me would be an MBA rather than an MS in economics or finance. So I planned to go to an MBA, let's say from the start of my career at the central banks. It was like a multi-year planning process where I knew that I needed funding. So I figured the best way to do that was to get a scholarship from the corporates in Thailand, like banks, and K-Bank was giving out scholarship. And I planned to how the steps that I needed to get there by for example, taking CFA, working on volunteer, and then eventually I joined K-Bank, and that was more serendipity. But at the end, the plan kind of worked out over like 5 years since the start of my career to the day that I got the scholarship and actually went to Kellogg.
Amazing. I think that's kind of similar to me, right? I mean, I studied economics at undergrad, and I was like, whoa, maybe I shouldn't be an economist. So, and then
I don't blame you, man.
I actually wanted to be in high school. I wanted to be a vaccine researcher, and then in university, actually, my plan was to go into vaccine strategy. So I wanted to join Gates Foundation, but the Gates Foundation wasn't accepting non-Americans, unfortunately. Bridge Bank Group, which does a lot of work with them, doesn't accept non-Americans either. So I had to go with my third choice, which turned out to be Bain Consulting, right? And then I went in, and then similar to you, I went in and I was like, whoa, like you said, every Asian. I was like, I don't think I'm going to make partner in this company. So I should explore an MBA, right? Because it's an acceptable off-ramp, So I totally get where you're coming from. Could you share a little bit more about, obviously, you went on, you got your offer. What was it like flying out, I guess? Were you excited? Were you scared? Were you nervous? Do you remember that flight out to hit out your first day on campus?
Yeah, I still remember. It felt like dream come true, because I was working on it for like 5 years. And I think MBA at Kellogg, they did a really good job at preparing for you to go to campus, because before we leave Thailand, we have this alumni get together where the alumni would meet the new incoming student, and that we got to ask a lot of questions from them. And I see one of our alum here, Paul Ark, as well, in the audience. I met him right before I went to Kellogg when he was taking a sabbatical in Thailand. And I think I kind of knew what I was getting into, but I still felt very excited on the flight there, and there's like this whole new world that I haven't explored. So I was super excited about it.
Yeah, I remember that too. It was like a dream come true. I think there's a good phrase that you use there. And then I think we'll just like to talk a little bit more. So, okay, so you entered the MBA and you knew that you were not going to go back to becoming a central bank / economist role, right? What were you thinking in terms of geography? What were you thinking in terms of industry? Like, walk us through that process. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I took a scholarship from K-Bank to go to an MBA school because my family couldn't support me. And I knew that I had to come back to the bank. So it's like this typing where usually corporate would give out scholarship and you do your 2 year or 1 year of studying and you come back and you are bonded by that company for a certain period of time. So I knew I was going to come back. Yeah, that was the plan.
And then that changed, right? So what happened? So go on. So you had that plan, and then obviously we know that that didn't happen based on what you just shared professionally. So what happened? You were like, what? You were like, were you walking around campus, and then suddenly the light, the skies opened up, and then you were like, oh, I'm going to do something else. Like, like what happened?
Yeah, honestly, first year of MBA was really confusing. I don't know if you felt this, but I was looking around, exploring different career paths, tried consulting for a while, tried to get an internship in consulting, didn't get it. And I think that was a reflection moment for me. It gave me kind of a push to really think of what I really want to do because I went into MBA. I wanted to do something around fintech, wanted to make something that's tangible. And I thought consulting was going to be it because, there's a structured process and you get to work with executive at banks or financial institution and things like that. So it felt sort of feasible. Whereas I thought about VC as well, starting when I was starting the process of recruiting, and people kept telling me that VC is impossible, especially for non-Americans in America. So I kind of pursued consulting for a while, but I ended up did not get an internship. So I reflected on what I really wanted to do, and I thought that I wanted to give a shot in VC. So I reached out to Paul Art here in the audience, and he took me in for an internship. And so during the first year and second year, I came back to Thailand to work at a corporate VC arm that focuses on fintech investing with Paul. And during that time, I really loved it because the first project that I do was ICO back in 2017 when it was just getting hot. The research was about how it would impact capital market across the world and how companies would raise fund. And the more I dig into it, the more I got interested in the blockchain and crypto space. So after I got back to my second year at Kellogg in the US, I applied to a Kellogg program where they place students into a small group to study in San Francisco, which is our satellite office. So I went there in like January 2018 and started looking for internship by cold calling Paul, and I just like LinkedIn message him and Paul Viraditagit, which you talked to a partner at Pantera. So I LinkedIn message him asking him for an internship, and he was kind enough to reply and took me in, and that's how I got into Pantera. And I think that period in San Francisco was a life-changing moment because I got to work with these like amazing partner, and I was literally working 7 days a week and just to like look at a lot of deals that went through Paul's desk. And it was super interesting because that was like the peak time of blockchain for the last bubble, right? So it was really active. So after a few months in San Francisco, I really knew that I wanted to be in VC. And that time, luckily, K Bank, which is the bank that sponsored me for my MBA school, they started to set up their VC fund as well. So after graduation, I kind of have this kind of big decision to make whether or not I wanted to stay in the US and pursue my career in San Francisco, which is what I really wanted to do, or go back home to kind of finish my bond, basically. So I tried to negotiate with the bank because as an MBA student, you have like 1 year of OPT visa where you can stay in the US without having to go through the lottery process. So I negotiated with the bank, wrote up a proposal, talked to my negotiation professor, and tried to get myself to stay 1 year longer. But then the bank disagreed, and I had to come back to Thailand. So I started my career back in Thailand right after graduation at the VC fund. And I was in depression for a while, didn't want to come back really, but then kind of like talked myself through it and really made peace with the fact that I have to be back. And then 2.5 years later, I just been working at Beacon VC and really loved the experience. Helped them made a few investments in fintech space and kind of found my way to Monks Hill because I felt that I like VC job, but then I didn't want the limitation of being in a strategic VC, and I wanted to get a broader exposure of VC space. So I decided to move from K-Bank to Monks Hill, which is another uphill battle because there was a lot of negotiation on how to settle my bond, basically. So it was like very dramatic over this past few years.
Wow, what an amazing story because I know I love it, right? I mean, you couldn't get into consulting, which is a lot of Southeast Asians in the MBA programs look at consulting as a quality premium job to go after. And then you got the harder one, which is VC, which is harder than consulting. So hats off to you, actually. And then, you had this really interesting and very similar set of stories, right? I mean, in this audience and a lot of the listeners out there, there are many like, sea turtles, like I'm looking at David, for example, as part of the audience. He's a Stanford MBA, also kind of like going through some similar dynamics. But you're just making a decision about whether to double down in a career in the States or to build it out back home, right, in Southeast Asia, right? So tell us more a little, and obviously, hats off again to you for negotiating every stage of the way. I have many friends on bonds, and that's another topic altogether. Maybe more for closed doors.
Yeah.
So I'd love to kind of get deeper in this one, right? So you made a decision to come back, right? Obviously the bond was a big part of it, and so forth. What were you thinking? Like, what were you feeling? Like, because every sea turtle kind of feels the same thing, right? Which is they're in the States, they're enjoying their life, and they have to make a decision to go back to Southeast Asia, right? So do you remember any conversations? Who did you talk to discuss this decision? What were you thinking? What were you doing? Were you, walking around a lot?
There were many tears involved, in fact. And I think the biggest question that was going through my mind was the fact that had I not come back, then there was going to be a big financial consequence because I was going to break my bond, right? And so I thought about a career that I would have in the US versus in Southeast Asia. What tipped the scale was that can't really take that much of a financial burden back then to break the bond. And I think coming back and working at a VC fund for a top bank in Thailand wasn't so bad. And it was one of the way that I could achieve my career goal, which is providing financial and capital for amazing entrepreneurs to build their company as well. So whether I do it in San Francisco or in Asia, that wouldn't be much different. The only difference that I thought was material was the fact that in San Francisco, I get to work with amazing people, and that was going to be a lot of learning opportunity for me. Whereas in Asia, it would have to. I really don't know what the space was like back then because VC space in Thailand was very nascent. So it was more of a kind of making peace with the fact that one, financially, it wasn't going to make sense, and two, I can still achieve my career goal no matter where I was. And thirdly, was just that I would have to just be more scrappy in terms of how I learn and grow in this career and figure it out in the future. It was more of a risk that I didn't know what I was getting into in Asia, whereas I knew what was in San Francisco already. So yeah, so I think those three factors altogether kind of helped me make that decision.
Wow, that's really real. Thanks for sharing that. I think that feels exactly like all my other, MBA friends who were bonded back to their consulting firms or back to the government or back to wherever. It's a common dynamic, right? It's like the big question is like, without this sponsorship, it was impossible to go, And so the question is, now do we break it, right? So it's a very awkward conversation to have.
Yeah, and I also think though that a lot of Asians, particularly Thai people, I think we're not used to the fact that students can take out student loans, which is very common in the US. For Thailand, or at least for me, I thought there was a bit of a stigma to it. I think back in the days when I was deciding whether or not to take the scholarship or to take out loans, it was like this fear of like the unknown of like if you take loans, then will I be able to find a job? Will I get a visa? Will I be able to pay back? It was a lot of like uncertainty, which made me not taking that decision. So it kind of helped me shape my thinking when I came back and I worked at Beacon for a few years when I was thinking what was the right next move for me to make. And I decided to take a leap and leave the bank pay back my loans and pay back my settlement and my bond, and then join Monks Hill because I wanted to take that risk and I don't want to play it safe like I did before. You know what I mean?
Wow, that you you just said two things that were really interesting, right? I mean, the first thing you said was Asians, which is very true, by the way, don't really understand the trade-off between loans versus the bond, right? Especially because, now, and I agree with you, I think now that I'm more sophisticated, I'm like, oh, student loans are actually pretty cheap, in terms of the way they're structured versus a bond, right? I mean, obviously they have their pros and cons. There's definitely a lot of stigma around the loan side that is not justified if you look at the economic reality. The fact that we're talking about the MBA, right, which is, normally pushes us into better paying jobs, right, than we had before, right? I mean, I think it would be different if you're doing a trade school for a different vocation, right? And then I think the calculus is a bit different. And then the second thing that you said that was really interesting was like your personal evolution from, deciding to take on more risk, right? And that's a very like intentional choice that takes time. I just thought that was a really interesting piece because, because I'm curious, right? Like, how did you feel like you felt more comfortable taking more risk? Was it because you crunched the numbers on yourself? Was it because you got to see some great people like Paul and other folks make similar trade-offs? How did you, I guess, make that decision intentionally to take on more risk?
It was a tough decision because I kept going back and forth between like security and like taking a leap of faith. I think it comes down to the fact that time is very limited. I think in life, like you can always make more money, but you can't get back time, right? You can't have more time. And I don't know why, but I operate in a sense that there's a sense of urgency all the time. So I wanted to be in a place where I can grow the fastest and be in a place where there's resources for me to learn from and to kind of shadow and learn from people who I work with. I know that I learn best from shadowing people. And back in San Francisco day, I was like learning so much because I got to shadow Paul Verdict and Sheil Monod at 500 Startup. And I knew that that was the best approach that I learned. So coming back here and making that decision, it was one, the time element that you'll never get back time. And I want to be in a place where I can grow the fastest and be at the right place to kind of push forward my career. And two, it's just knowing yourself and how you best operate as a person. For me, it was about observing and shadowing people. And so I wanted to be in a place where I can do that. And lastly, just having a lot of conviction in yourself, because now I feel that if I don't make it in this career, it's me who I can blame. And it's like I can't blame other people anymore because I'm taking a leap of faith in myself. So I'm just placing bet on myself, which is super hard. I think the last part was the toughest thing to make a decision on because I'm not that confident in my ability, but I kind of want to see how far I can go and without like being able to blame it on other people or the circumstances.
I love what you just said, right? Like, you're owning the consequences, right? Which is super terrifying. But it's also, I don't know, it lets you have that growth, right? Because, there's no one else there, right? I mean, and it's something that you're right. I didn't, until you shared it, yeah, you're right. Because in some ways, you started out with the bank and then your life has been with the bank all the way till 2020, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was like super safe. It's like the safest life you can have.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. I know.
And compared to you when you like started your own company and like all these things, it's like super brave, I feel.
Thank you. I mean, it's still terrifying from year to year. I could tell you that. That's interesting, right? Because I remember, like, when I was graduating from UC Berkeley, and I remember I told my professor, and I said, okay, I've decided, and I know what my life for the next few years is going to be. I'm going to go to Bain for the next few years. Then I'd like to do a secondment at, Gates Foundation, maybe along the way. And then I'm going to do like an MBA. But then I don't know what else is out there for me. And then I remember the professor was like staring at me. She's like, okay, clearly you've planned out the next like 4 to 5 years of your life. And she's like, yeah, you don't need to plan more than that even. Like, Don't feel bad that you haven't planned out your whole life. Like 4 to 5 years is pretty good for a senior. Most people haven't even figured out their jobs or whatever it is. And then she was also like, yeah, and Jeremy, like, maybe you should have more serendipity in your life, And I was like, what are you talking about? It's just like, what is this thing called serendipity? And then, but it was something that stuck with me a little bit. And I still, I'll remember it from time to time, right? I ended up not doing the thing I thought I was going to do. I ended up not staying at Bain or as long as I thought I would.
Yeah. So why was that the case? Like, what helped you make that decision to take the path that was not what you envisioned yourself?
Yeah. By the way, Nat has an amazing podcast as well.
I'm sorry, I'm hijacking your moderator position.
It's at theventurejourney.com. So she's also a great guest and interviewer as well. So, but I will answer the question. I think the first thing was, sometimes I talk about in terms of the floor versus the ceiling, right? Like the hygiene factors versus the actuals. I think a big part of it was, I think that when I went to Bain, it both created both a ceiling and a floor. And okay, the reason why I went to Bain was because I applied to Gates Foundation, got rejected. I applied to Bridgespan Group, and I got rejected. So Bain was my third choice, which always surprises a lot of folks as well. And the reason why I applied was because I had been part of a social impact consulting club, and there was this person. She was a great, she was a senior, I think, and then she was coaching me and managing me a little bit in the university undergrad club. And she went to Bain, and I was like, whoa, she went to Bain. And then years later, she went to Harvard. And so I was like, oh, she's cool. She's like an achievable role model. Does it make sense? Like, it wasn't like one of those like massive Harvard MBAs or whatever it was. It was like this person's just like 3 years ahead of me, right? And then I went to Bain, and it changed my life because there were so many folks coming back from an MBA. Does it make sense? Like Harvard, Stanford, Kellogg, INSEAD. So there was a floor in that sense. But there was also an implicit understanding in the company, and there was like an internal portal to talk about the MBA process in terms of the application and stuff like that. So there's like internal knowledge sharing, right? And so it created a floor where the moment that happened and I did my internship at Bain, it made me not have a bond, if that doesn't make sense, right? So I think there's a big difference between you and me in that, right? It's like I didn't have a bond, right? I was lucky enough to take out a function of loans and family money, was able to get me through undergrad. And then I went to this, and so I was able to not have that dimension of the bond, if that makes sense, which was, I think, not only a visible gain in the short term in terms of education, but also a visible potential loss to break it. But also it's the first option, if that makes sense, right? It's like, it's the alternative that all things are being compared against, right? Whereas for me, it was like the moment I did that Bain internship without the bond, my base case was always going to be stay at Bain. Does it make sense? Like everything else felt like upside, right? Like setting up a social enterprise and bootstrapping it felt like an exploration exercise, right? Doing a Harvard MBA, that felt like upside, right? So my flaw was a nice flaw that didn't have any potential loss. The reason why I share that is, obviously I can share some of this airy-fairy think about, like be fearless and, drink, I don't know. I was going to like ionize waters. I don't know, something like that to become more fearless. But I think being fearless is also being privileged or intentional or functional both enough to create the environment where you don't have that fear, right? Which is something that you did, right? I mean, you made a decision to take the bond, and then you made a decision to be intentional about exploring whether you should break the bond by exploring it via different internships and getting different other folks to mentor you and coach you. And then you got enough information to feel justified that it was worth getting out of it and exploring a new role, right? I honestly think, if you ask me, I think you probably had a more courageous arc because you were both intentional and savvy enough to figure out whether to do it or not. Because I know other friends who are still in their bonds, right? Forever, right? Effectively. Whether it's a bond to the government or it's a bond to Bain or McKinsey or BCG. And it's their default path, and they were never intentional or savvy enough to get the certainty to break it, right? And do something else. So I think, Nat, you did something really amazing here.
Yeah, but also I think it's a function of what's important in your life too. I think some people value family, some people value work, and some people might value money, for example. And I think each of us operate in different way based on what we value most in life. And for me, it's just no family right now. So work is something that's really important for me. And it's always been the case. So that's why I think I made that decision. Whereas other people might have a different mental model and different value. So I wouldn't say this is the path for everyone, but at least it was the right one for me.
Wow, you said something really true, right? Which is that I really resonate with that, which is people have different priorities, right? And I know many folks who took the bond and they prioritize family and stability and so on and so forth, or they like the firm, right? And so they keep going. And that's totally great. And I'm super supportive of them and I love them. And I think, like you said, there's a lot of people like you, Nat, who eventually, did something else, right? I think the tricky part is always the folks in the middle, right? The people who hang out with us and say they want to get out or explore something else, but then they're not taking the actions for whatever set of reasons needed for them to get out of it, right? Which is honestly the worst of both worlds, right? You have the dream to do something else, but you don't have the intentionality to do it, to get out of it. And on the converse side, you have the security of a bonded place, but you're not enjoying the benefits of that bonded place because your brain is somewhere else, right?
There's many reasons why someone would not take the leap. And I think what's best for each person is just really understand why you're doing what you're doing and being intentional about how you see yourself in the future because you can never turn back time. This is the only life you have. So you need to choose the path that you won't regret in the future. I think that's what I optimize for. And I think a lot of people are doing that as well. And it takes a bit of courage to get out of your comfort zone, but I think it's totally worth it if you're willing to take a bet on yourself.
Yeah, amazing. And talking about taking a bet on yourself, one thing I noticed is that you've had a lot of people make a bet on you, right? So Paul, Akia, someone who you reached out and got help from. There's a whole bunch of different mentors that you got help from as well. So I'm just kind of curious about your role models or the people who have helped you along the way to get there.
I've been super lucky to have people who who have given me the opportunity to be where I am today. My first career at the central bank, don't know how I got it. I mean, I didn't really prepare for anything, and they were kind enough to take me in. And throughout my career, specifically the people who got me into VC, Paul Ark, Paul did ticket at Pantera, Shil Monat at 500, like they're all very, very successful in their own respective career. And I think what they taught me is to pay it forward to other people who are aspiring young people and want to have a career in tech as well. So recently, I've been doing a mentorship program for women where I mentor women who are in their first job, just out of college in terms of how to think about career and be the sounding board, which has been a really rewarding experience. I have one mentee in Hong Kong who's looking for a VC job in Singapore, and I've been talking to her for the past year. And that helped me pay it forward and be open to serendipity that happens along the way as well. Like a few weeks ago, a high school student, high school, mind you, 17 years old, called me and said, LinkedIn messaged me first, asking me for a call. And I was like, okay, sure, let's hop on a call. And she asked me like, oh, what should I do in order to get into tech? What is your career like? And what are the steps that I need to take? And she was freaking 17. I was like, when I was 17, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And, just being open to a serendipity meeting like that is something that I treasure a lot because that's how, this like little magic happen and you kind of be able to kind of impact someone's life in a very small way. But I think anyone can do it, just being open-minded and open to kind of share your experience to people who might need it and you don't even know.
It's interesting as well because I remember I was at UC Berkeley and I was like being asked to be a guide for all these like elementary middle school kids. And they were asking me about how to get to UC Berkeley. And I was just like, whoa, 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 whoa. You all are like born after year 2000, right? And like, and I'm like, why are you asking these questions? And I think one interesting thing is like with the internet and everything, like I too myself have gotten some messages from middle school students asking about VC, right? And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. They don't call it millennials anymore. That shows how old we are now. I think there's something else, Gen Z, here's the question I have, right? Which is like, look at all these people and helping. Like, what do you think it's important, right? Like, because you've been coached and mentored by so many great folks, right? I guess by two Pauls in your life.
Yeah, I don't know what my life has to do with a lot of calls.
I know. Maybe in the future, I gotta like name something or someone after Paul. And then now you're also paying it forward. I think what forms of coaching do you think are more, I won't say helpful, maybe are more resonant? Are there certain forms of coaching that I don't want to say better or maybe better, versus are there some forms of coaching or styles that you feel are less helpful or less productive?
That's a good point. I think, at least for me personally, I learned in a few ways. One is observe. So I think it's very powerful when I get to sit in meetings with the partners and have a chance to debrief with them post meeting on what they think the company is and share my point of view and learn from their point of view. I think that is a way to learn and accumulate the way you think and analyze company as a VC, right? So I think shadowing is really important, especially for VC, which is an apprenticeship model where you really need to follow the partners everywhere and kind of shadow them. So that was the first one. And two is being thrown in the deep end. I think Paul V and both Paul R, Paul V, Shield, like they all did that to me. Like give me really tough assignment and give me the full autonomy to operate and do it and let me just do it, right? Because being thrown in the deep end, not knowing what I was doing, that was like I had to like really get myself up to par in terms of my knowledge, my analysis and things like that. For example, when I was joining Paul V at Pantera, I knew what blockchain was like, but I wasn't really in the industry for a long time, right? Because people who are really into blockchain in San Francisco, they usually would have heard or been in the space since 2011, 2012. I just got into the blockchain space in 2017, but I worked at Pantera in 2018. So I was very new. And he was just expected me to like work on different deals. For example, this deal where the company was trying to mimic an arbitration process in law into the smart contract. And I really had to figure out if that was legally possible, it was feasible or not. So I had to pull a lot of strings, ask my lawyer friend, talk to my professor at Northwestern, and like really think through, bring in like this knowledge about legality to blockchain and how smart contract works to really ramp up my understanding in the space and be scrappy enough to figure things out. That was really hard. And like he keeps throwing me projects and deals like that until I was able to kind of, okay, now I know what the space is like. I have a bit of fundamental knowledge to do analysis. So it was like being thrown in the deep end. That helps a lot because it helps you learn so much in so little time. So I think two things following that answer is one, you learn from shadowing, especially in a VC world where you have to shadow the partner, and I think that accumulates over time. And two, you learn from like being thrown in the deep end and just be comfortable with not knowing how to get to the answer, but kind of be creative enough to like figure out how to get to the answer. And that helps you kind of build foundational knowledge in different different sectors, and kind of repeat that learning model every time you see a new deal. That's been very helpful, especially at Monks Hill, where it's a sector agnostic fund. And I need to kind of relearn new industry in every deal. And we're looking at, 7, 8 deals a week, which is crazy amount of deals. So the process of learning, I really need to kind of be proficient with the process of learning, essentially. So I think both shadowing and relearning and being thrown in the deep end has helped a lot.
Yeah, that's really true. Definitely agree with you about the apprenticeship models being really important and also quite crazy, right? Because it's not, how many industries in the world are there where it's really defined as an apprenticeship model? There's very few, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where value accrues, right? If you look at Naval Ravikant, the prominent angel investor and serial entrepreneur in the US, where he talks a lot about career capital, and there's few career that you can accumulate wealth on, and that is usually a career where you have leverage. And leverage usually comes from either code, where you can scale something for a lot of people, or it comes from leverage as a capital, where you take people's capital and kind of like invest and generate returns based on that, or leverage from hiring other people. And I think for you as a person, you kind of have to figure out what leverage it is, because if you do things that other people can do, then you're not really standing out. And VC is one of the career where can't really excel by doing what other people is doing. Really need to like be different. And I think the learning comes from experience of shadowing others, experience from building your own point of view and all these things. There's no framework for you to learn. It's not like a book like consulting where you have to do X, Y, and Z to be good in this career. It's a bit more unstructured.
Yeah, it's very true. It's interesting you mentioned Naval. Like, what do you read? Like, do you read Naval, Twitter? Like, what do you learn? What do you read? What do you consume?
I love Naval a lot, and if you're not familiar with him, I would really recommend this digital book called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant. It's like the writer just accumulates all of Naval's Twitter tweets about life, wealth, and health, and accumulate it into a book. I think that was very useful. Other two books that I really like, one is So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport. I think when you really want to be good at something, you have to put in the hours, right? Like there's no shortcut, and there's no such thing as passion, because I think passion comes from hard work and really, really hone in your skill to be good at what you do. And last book is another book that I like. The last one is How You Measure Your Life by Harvard professor. What's his name? Can't remember from the top of my head, but the book is called How You Measure Your Life. At the end of the day, it comes from like being intentional in what you do and having a well-rounded and balanced life between work, health, and wealth. I think these are like the three things that I strive for, and I'm like trying to learn how to balance it all, which is not that easy.
Wow, I love those three books. I have not read those first two books, so I need to definitely read the Almanac. Although, of course, I follow some of the tweets, and then I've heard about Cal Newport because I think he's also wrote a book on deep work.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So that's the other one I've heard, same writer. So I need to read these two books as well. But one thing it's funny because you say How to Measure Your Life. That's one of my books that I really, really love.
I love it too.
I love this so much. Yeah, exactly. As well, it's great. Two colleagues discovering they love the same book. Great. Clearly, we don't hang out enough at work.
Maybe we should do a book club.
Yeah, we should do a book club. Yeah. It's by Professor, because you don't remember the author, it's by Professor Clayton Christensen.
Right.
Who is most famous for creating the word disruption, which every VC loves and every founder loves. And a funny story was, I didn't learn about the word disruption, I didn't know Clayton Christensen for disruption. I knew him because I read How to Measure Your Life, and I read that book first, and that was like, I must have read that book at least 4 times now over the years, and I keep rediscovering the book, if that makes sense. Like when I was reading it as a senior, it was a very different book from how I read it as a young professional versus where I am today, right? And I knew about him because he wrote the book, and it was only like years later when I was doing my Harvard MBA that I was like, oh, he's also famous globally for disruption and all this other stuff. But it was interesting was if you asked him and you said like, what book did you like? Because I got to meet him, shake his hand and everything. Like, hey, yeah. And you asked him like, which book did he like really find like meaningful? It's weird because he was like, How to Measure Your Life was the more meaningful book, to him than disruption, right? Which is crazy because like the whole tech industry, the whole VC industry is predicated on disruption. So all of us would be like, we know him for the word disruption and obviously the innovator's dilemma, but he knows himself for How to Measure Your Life, which is crazy. And he passed away recently, which is a big shame and everything. He was so loved by all the students and everything. It's just a interesting thing where he found that book more compelling, right? Than what he's world famous for, which is I think a good way to it's something to think about a lot, right?
Over like My past career, I think I was really work driven in my 20s. But then I think this phase of my career, I know that there are other aspects of life as well. And I kind of try to figure out how best to balance work with other things, things that make you happy, things that make you healthy, and accumulate wealth along the way. Like these things, like no one teaches you off the book, right? Like it's not taught in school or in uni. So I learned a lot from reading books written by these like successful people who actually were very intentional and thoughtful about how they want to lead their life. And yeah, I think it's like a very valuable place to learn, especially when it's not that prevalent. It's like something that you can't really learn elsewhere, or there's no one teaching you about it.
Well, we're coming up on time here, but obviously, and we'll, if you have some time, we'll let people be able to raise their hands and ask any questions. So if anybody wants to raise their hands, feel free to raise your hands and have some questions from the group audience if people want them. Nat, this quick question I have here is like, where were you 10 years ago?
Oh my God.
You just talk about teaching and guiding, right? What would you teach and guide yourself with the Nat of 10 years ago? Yeah.
I think I had this tendency similar to you where kind of need to plan. I want to plan my life out like 10 years from now if possible. But if I look back to my confused self 10 years ago, starting off my career, I would say that everything will be okay and just, be patient and let life works its magic. Like you don't really need to like be in control of every single thing in life or like have everything figured out, because I think life is a lot of magical moments where you can't really know where it'll take you. So just be open to possibility and have trust in yourself that it'll work out.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nat. I think we have quick time for if anybody wants to raise their hands, we can answer a few questions and then go from there. Anybody want to raise their hands? There you go, Paul. You want to chat to someone that you helped along the way?
I'm going to make one comment because I just looked at your profile and there's nothing there, and I'm really surprised that you should at least be putting your podcast on there because I know you spend so much time on it. It's some really good quality stuff that, frankly, you're just depriving your Clubhouse audience by not promoting it. So please get that up there because it is some really interesting conversations you have with some interesting folks. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say. But Nat, I'm going to say that the last point about that you made about just not getting too wound up about controlling everything, kind of going with the flow of things. I think that's really important. And I know I know early on in kind of our Kellogg relationship before you went off to school, I know that you're fretting about every aspect of your journey. And I know one of the things that I always kept trying to, insinuate is like, it's just going to be okay. And I guess, I think the way you said it reminded me of an analogy I used once with another person is that, because I actually, for quite a long time after I left investment banking, I was into sailing. I learned how to sail, which was something that was on my bucket list from my undergraduate days at Berkeley, I'll add. So Jeremy, go Bears. But the thing about sailing is that, a big part of it is out of your control because, you kind of are, as much as, you're operating, your boat, you're kind of at the mercy of the tides and the wind. And so it's a combination between having some measure of control over what you're doing, but also sort of shaping that around forces that you can't control. And when you find yourself in that moment where you get that wind and you're riding it, it's an adrenaline rush. And it's a combination of knowing that there are things that are out of your control and things that are within your control. And you just have to find that moment where, the two converge. And so that's life. And if you can kind of come to peace with that, I think to Nat's point, it's magical.
Well, thank you, Paul. You said it best. And for audience who might not know, Paul has a fantastic and adventurous career. And I think I learned a lot about serendipity and, being in the flow from you, from having a career in person who has a career in investment banking, go to tech, and then a VC. You've definitely had a very fruitful career and a way to look at life. So thanks for that.
Getting to play a role in sort of your career has been a real it's been a real privilege. It's I know you're quite thankful to me, but I'm actually quite thankful to you. I love kind of watching what you do. You're doing some pretty cool shit. Pardon my language. No, and the thing, the thing is the epiphanies that you're coming up with. You're arriving at epiphanies that, you're arriving at these epiphanies as you sort of are transitioning into your 30s, and it's like those are kind of things that I didn't hit upon until much later in life. And so the fact that you're kind of arriving, to these realizations so early on, just because again, I think the whole fact that you're now starting to pay that forward to 17-year-olds, I don't think that when I was 30 I would be able to provide that same level of guidance to someone in high school, because I hadn't arrived at that stage in my life yet where I had that insight. So the fact that you've arrived at that point much earlier in your life and able to pay that forward much sooner in your career means that by the time you get to my age now, I can only imagine how much impact you're going to have on a much wider group of people. So I'm quite excited.
Thank you, Paul. That means a lot.
This isn't about me, so I'm just going to go quiet. I'm going to go back to stage and let someone else come on up. This is all about Nat.
Yeah, it's all about Nat. And again, to plug her podcast is theventurejourney.com.
Thanks, Jeremy.
It's like a great Thai and Southeast Asian speakers and founders there.
I really need to get on this Clubhouse game because I haven't put anything on my profile because I really never used it before, and this is my formal first time. So thanks for taking me on this journey.
Okay, Nat. I think that's about it. I think everyone's pretty chill. I think a lot of people here have been hanging out for the whole hour and a bit to hear your story.
Yeah, you guys are troopers. Thanks for staying with us.
For everybody else, this podcast will come out in about, we have about 3 to 4 months of guests, so it's coming out in about 4 months. So if you really love this episode, tell your friends that to keep an eye out for it in 4 months. All right. Thank you so much, Nat.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeremy. This has been a pleasure. And thanks everyone for listening and really appreciate you guys.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share this episode with friends and colleagues. Sign up at www.jeremyau.com to discuss this episode with other community members in our forum. Stay well and stay brave.